Telltale's The Walking Dead. When I say those words, the first thing that pops in your mind is probably Season 1. And it's for a good reason. Season 1 is regarded as the best one, and it's probably your favorite too. And I wouldn't even blame you. I love my man, my goat Lee, as much as anyone else.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
And I'm just gonna take a wild guess here, and I'm gonna say that you do not like Season 3 all that much. And again, would I blame you? No. Season 3 is definitely flawed. I know it's not my favorite season of all time, but I also do not hate it. When I ignore the fact that Telltale does not care about you or the emotional impact of the ending of Season 2 in the slightest, this season is actually pretty good, as Season 3 takes a slightly different approach to its story and its characters, as now we explore the story and the relationships of a family. The main theme of the entire season is family. We see the story of a group of people who knew each other before the apocalypse, a group that is bound by blood. And a part of this theme of family is the struggle between blood bonds and bonds that are not blood bonds. As throughout the game, many times you are to pick whether to side with your brother David or go along with Clementine or Kate. And for the most part, the conflict is handled pretty well. But what if I told you it becomes far easier to choose when one character, in terms of writing, far outshines the others? And that character is my man, my brother, David. And I know, before you say anything, I know I just implied that David is a better character than Clementine, and that is because he is. In Season 3 at the very least. I love Clementine as much as the other guy, okay? I don't really think there is anything else to say about it. Telltale's The Walking Dead is her story, the story of her growing up in the apocalypse. But I am also not going to pretend that Season 3 is not her weakest season, because you could literally take her away from there and not much would change. Yes, there is the subplot of her looking for AJ, but that's merely just a setup for Season 4, and her involvement in Season 3 did not have to be as big. And I'm going to talk about Clementine a bit later in regards to David, but now let's move to the main topic of today, and that is David himself. To really understand what makes David such an interesting character, we need to take a look at first at his family life, the one that happened before the apocalypse, the one that we see in the flashbacks. We don't actually know a whole lot about David, but we do know enough to make a pretty clear picture of him. We know that he lived with his second wife and his 2 children from his first marriage. And to keep things brief, his marriage with Kate, his second wife, was not really that good. In fact, it kinda sucked. Kate was considerably younger than David, and it is quite obvious from her early interactions in the game with Javier that she was not really happy with her role as the stepmother, especially when it came to Gabe, who did not really get along with her.
Oh, when I found out David had kids, I told him, I am not changing who I am around them. And when he proposed, I reminded him that I'm not exactly stepmother material.
And as we would soon find out, her relationship with David himself was also not going that well, as David was rather verbally abusive to her, as David demanded rather militaristic discipline from her and his family as a whole. In fact, David's militaristic approach to life itself really is a core trait to his character as a whole. You see, in the flashback in Thicker Than Water, which is the 4th episode of Season 3, Javier and David have a conversation. As Javier was recently banned from baseball, David brings up his idea to return to the military. As he explains, he felt a lot more at home in the army than he ever felt with the family. And right from the get-go, this is a rather mature thing to realize, as I would say it is a lot more common for men like David who find themselves in a situation like that do not realize that they are not really a family guy. One such example would be Sam from the movie Brothers. Sam is a veteran who returns home, but he's suffering from severe PTSD and trauma, and and he struggles to reintegrate into his family life. In fact, I would say there are a lot of parallels between the movie Brothers and The Walking Dead Season 3 when it comes to the relationships between the brothers in both cases and the wife of one of them. But I think you know what I'm trying to say. David did not come to make his life choices in a vacuum. Coming from a family that really upholds the traditional family values, as we can see in another flashback in the episode From the Gallows, where Javier and David's father, Salvador, asks them to stick together after he is gone.
Is it? I know you think you're strong enough to handle that alone, and so does your brother, and you're both wrong. You have to take care of each other. You two are all I'll leave behind.
And not just that, even in his professional life as the sergeant of the US Army, as you would imagine, the job of the army is to protect the country's interests, and that includes its values and the status quo. And as luck would have it, the traditional American values are those of a traditional family. A man serves his country, comes home, builds a family. That's the American rhythm he grew up with. However, David would eventually realize he does not belong in that position. You know, he saw in himself that he was not really a warm father, nor was he a nurturing husband. And he did not take out his frustration on his family. Because after all, he really did love them. This is why he decided to do what he thought was the best, and that was bailing out and going back to the military. And I'm aware that sounds kinda shitty when you put it like that, but it is genuinely the best course of action he could have taken at that point. And it's also not like he wanted to disappear with no trace and completely abandon his family. He would still at the very least support his family financially, and he asked Javi to look after them. And you as Javi have the option to tell him that you will or that you won't. Just to be clear, I think both options are valid from Javier's point of view. I do not think that declining makes Javier somewhat of a bad person or anything, because at the end of the day, it is really not his responsibility. At the same time though, I am also understanding towards David's crash out if he refused, because if the roles were reversed, he would help Javier. And you might think that that wouldn't be the case because he is in these flashbacks usually very hostile to Javier, but he is that way because he views Javier as a failure. Because Javier not only left his family, that being his parents, he also failed at his career, which made him come back. What I'm trying to say here is that David is someone who, despite not really being a family guy, has family at the top of his priorities. Now, does David put family first? That's honestly hard to say, and I would even say no, because his view of life and society is very utilitaristic. To put it very simply, utilitarianism is a moral theory that dictates that the best course of actions that one can take is the one that maximizes overall well-being for the greatest number of people. Actually, I do not think that there is any other way to put it than simply, because it's probably the simplest moral theory that exists and has an unnecessarily long and complicated name that I can barely pronounce, so I'm not going to do that again. But this brings us to David's life after the apocalypse, and a very brief history of what happened to David shortly after the apocalypse started. David, along with two other people, Joan and Clinton Barnes, formed a group called New Frontier. Shortly after that, it is implied that the three leaders were trusting the wrong people, which led to a betrayal of some sort. It is unknown what exactly happened, but this event was mentioned by David in Above the Law. As you would imagine, the group after this became rather untrusting. They started to live a nomadic lifestyle, in the process of looking for a place that they could call home. During this time, they met a doctor named Paul Lingard, who suffered from depression and addiction. And it was David personally who helped him with his problems and even made him one of the leaders of New Frontier. After that, they discovered the community of Richmond, which they later renamed New Richmond after they took it over. During the first year with New Richmond, a bad winter that led to deaths of many of the residents struck, which led Joan to organize a small group of soldiers that would raid other communities to get supplies. This little scheme of hers was, of course, left secret from the rest of the council. This would eventually lead to the conflict with Javier's group. His family would naturally think that David is behind this, because they would find out that David is indeed the head of the military in the New Richmond. David is now caught between sticking with the New Frontier or protecting his family. In order to protect the peace and order within the New Frontier, David even asked Javier to not tell the council what happened to his own daughter Mariana, that she was killed by the soldiers of the New Frontier. Which sort of shows his detachment, but not in a really bad way or anything. This is more like David sees an immediate issue in front of him right now, so he decides not to let emotions rule over him at this very moment, which showcases that he still sees himself as a soldier on a battlefield. Whether you go along David's plan or no, does not really matter, you still end up being kicked away from the New Richmond. If you don't, David gets a bit upset, but ultimately he still reaches out to you and says that he has planned for Javier and the whole family.
I had a goddamn plan!
And this sort of detachment is the best way to describe David. When we take a look at yet another flashback, which this game has a lot of flashbacks, goddamn. This is like the third one I'm talking about. This time at a flashback with Clementine and AJ. The flashback I'm talking about is of course the one where AJ gets sick and Clementine has the option to steal some medicine for him. That was back when she briefly joined up with the New Frontier, and of course she gets caught. While you have many dialogue options, the outcome is basically always the same, where David refuses to give AJ the medicine and he also takes him away from you. And your initial thought might be that David, what kind of a monster is he? He wouldn't even give a child his medicine? And you know what, that's a fair point. But David also makes a fair counterpoint. The general consensus among the New Frontier is that AJ is not going to make it, regardless if he gets the medicine or not. So David makes the decision to preserve the medicine for someone who might actually need it and who might be still saved with the medicine. And as it also turns out, AJ actually made it by some miracle. And by miracle I mean the Telltale's desire to make season 4 about Clementine, and as it turns out, David was the one to take care of AJ to raise him. And while it is true that he gave him away, he did it mainly because Richmond has experienced a very bad winter, which destroyed their crops, meaning that David couldn't leave and AJ couldn't stay. It is also heavily implied with the phrasing that David uses that he almost saw AJ as his adopted son.
He lived with me after we kicked you out, Clem. I'd already raised 2 kids. Thought it'd be a piece of cake. Not with that tyrant.
Is that why you gave him away?
We had a bad winter. Destroyed every crop we had. I couldn't leave Richmond. And AJ couldn't stay in Richmond. I gave AJ to Lingard and told him to do whatever he had to save his life.
But at the very least we can see that David saw AJ as part of his community and was willing to step up when AJ needed to be taken care of. So yes, David is someone who takes care of his people, but his cold pragmatism does not allow him to put the needs of one above the needs of the community, no matter how close the person is to David himself. Or at least that's kind of what the game presents at the beginning. Or rather, that's what David built himself up to be after the apocalypse. Because right from the beginning, he essentially believed that he lost his entire family. So it was easier for him to detach himself from all of the emotions and become someone who bases his decisions on pure logic. Things change for David, however, when he finds out that his wife, his son, and his brother are in fact still alive. David now gets caught between his duty and his family, and because he was always more of a soldier than a father, he picks a very militant and diplomatic solution. But at the end of the day, David is also still just a human who has his limits. And so while mostly being detached and unemotional, this whole facade starts to crumble once David finds out the truth about Joan and the operation she ran behind his back. We can see that David strongly disagrees with Joan's methods, and we can also see the distinctions between them. Now, Joan is not a very well written character. She comes off as a villain with really no depth, but if I were to give her the benefit of the doubt, I'd say she ran the secret operation merely in order to keep Richmond safe. And this is also David's main purpose after the apocalypse. However, Joan was willing to steal from and attack other communities, but David sees this as unacceptable, and this is regardless whether they killed his daughter or no. In fact, David seems rather unreactive to the death of his daughter, which I suppose is because he made peace with the fact that he would never see her again anyway. But we can see David's anger take charge when it comes to deciding what will happen to Max, one of the people who participated in Joan's plot. When you're making the decision what will you do with him, he will beg you and promise to testify against Joan in front of the whole council. And he actually does keep his promise. But the other two choices are, you either kill him as Javier, or you do nothing and David makes the decision and David kills him himself. Which, all things considered, was not really the best call in the situation they're in now, at least not from the logical standpoint, because David wanted to resolve the issue without any unnecessary violence. Max's testimony would have helped them a lot, or at least it would have if the decisions in Telltale's games actually mattered. But the moment when we really see David get unreasonably angry is towards the very end of the game, and that's when David pieces together Kate's attraction towards Javier. And yet again, regardless of Javier's reaction to it, whether he returns the attraction or denies it, David gets a little bit angry. Normally I would say that this is yet another example of a decision in a Telltale's game that doesn't make any difference. But here I would actually say that David not listening to what you have to say is kind of brilliant. Because throughout the entire game, David was someone who was always trying to think rationally. Due to the circumstances, he was forced to have basically no reaction to his daughter's death. And as you would imagine, all of these bottled up emotions would explode one day. Especially because of the way David and Javier were raised by their parents, along with the main theme of the game itself, about how family are the only people you can really rely on. So David could bear the betrayal of Joan, the betrayal of his own soldiers, but he finally got unimaginably angry when there was even a slightest hint of the betrayal coming from his own family, his own blood. David then proceeds to fight Javier, and you as Javier have the option either to fight back or refuse to fight to honor their father's wishes. As before he died, he told them to always stick together. Either way, the fight sort of ends with Clementine having to intervene to stop David, who afterwards proceeds to take Gabe and leave. And before I get to the final decision and what ultimately decides David's fate, I'm gonna have to talk about one of the main conflicts throughout the game, which is the conflict between David and Kate. You as Javier have spent basically the entire time of the apocalypse with Kate. Their relationship and all the formalities are introduced from the very beginning. The fact that she's David's wife and that she's not the biological mother of Mariana and Gabe. Also from the very beginning, the game gives you the option for Javier to sort of have attraction towards Kate like she does for him. The way I played these games was, I always tried to make the best decisions and the right decisions. And I think given all the circumstances that they are in, I do not think that going after Kate would be the best decision. And not only that, it's also kind of a scummy thing to do. I mean, she was your brother's wife, she was your bro's wife, and that's just, that's just something you do not do. I mean, imagine you died and your bro would start going after your wife. I mean, that's quite literally what happened in the Walking Dead show with Shane and Rick and Lori.
Stop acting like you know the way ahead, like you know the rules. There are no rules, man. We're lost.
No, man.
And I just do not think you can really justify that. Unless she's like really bad. In that case, like you can, like, your bro would have to understand from heaven and God would have to understand. I'm just kidding, I'm joking. And I think in a way Telltale was also sort of pushing this narrative for the sake of drama. It's also where some of the main decisions on Javier's part come from. As many times you are to pick between Kate and David. Throughout the game, Kate's sort of main argument is that they should leave Richmond, that they should go back on the road and, live like they lived up until that point. While David argues that you should stay and help him rebuild Richmond, and he presents it not as an option but as your duty. As yet again, their father told them to stick together before he passed away. And I'm going to be honest with you, I agree with him. Not because of some blood bond that David and Javier shared, but because I just did not care about Kate at all.
You are welcome to keep it to yourself. Because I don't care. I don't care.
And I tried on my multiple playthroughs of the game, I tried, but I failed. I failed to give a single damn about Kate. Quite possibly my biggest failure in life. Kate felt more like a plot device than anything. Just a ploy for a conflict between David and Javier. The chemistry she had with Javier felt so forced, and it is kind of funny how you keep rejecting her throughout the entire game, and then when she finally confesses at the very end, she's surprised when you reject her yet again. And to add even more fuel to the fire, she's the one who provokes the fight between David and Javier. Throughout the whole season, she does not really have any, moments with Javier that would indicate any deeper connection that goes beyond just the surface level attraction. David and Javier, on the other hand, have that scene on the rooftop, where David admits that he sees himself as nothing more than a soldier, but that he wants to change and he's trying to change. It is a great scene between two brothers, and honestly my favorite from the entire season 3, and I think I'm not the only one with this opinion. And this scene alone beats any interaction between Javier and Kate ever. And so let's say the game puts me in a position where I have to pick between David and Kate, that decision that might actually decide who is going to live and who is going to die. Let's just say I know what I would decide. And that is exactly what the game does. After David takes Gabe and they both leave, you have the option to go after him or stay with Kate to help clear Richmond of the walkers. And their roles sort of switch now. Kate wants to stay and save the people of Richmond, and David wants to leave because he basically sees no future in Richmond anymore. Not that it really matters, I would still pick David no matter what. But just going after David is not sufficient enough. Saving David is actually the rarest outcome you can get that is seemingly random. But you need to have Clementine to go with you, otherwise you will be just able to save Gabriel. And whether or not Clementine goes with you depends on the decisions she made in the flashbacks, which is very counterintuitive. I mean, you would think that it would matter how Javier treated Clementine throughout the game, but apparently it does not really matter all that much. Clementine will follow Javi's lead if she, in the flashbacks, accepted Ava's offer to join the New Frontier, injected AJ with the medicine when he needed it, and said goodbye to AJ when David took him, or if she again accepted Ava's offer, injected AJ, but she didn't say goodbye, but she would rather spit in David's face. Which doesn't really make sense to me, but whatever. Even if David is saved, he's not really seen afterwards, and I don't really think he has to be seen, as his ending being left to interpretation makes sense. And to be quite honest, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't go for this ending. I mean, unless you started romancing Kate. But it still seems like a kind of a stupid decision. And again, if you started romancing Kate, I do not want to be judgmental towards you, but I am going to be judgmental towards you because what the fuck? Anyway, I think that's it for this video. I think I said all that I had to say about David, my goat. If you enjoyed or if you agreed with anything I had to say today, meaning if you agreed with the objectively correct opinion about The Walking Dead, feel free to leave a like. And also do not forget to glaze me in the comment section about how smart and amazing my opinions and takes are, and also how I am amazing and great. And if by any chance you found something that you didn't agree with, then feel free to keep it to yourself, because I don't care and nobody cares. Anyway though, if you made it this far, thank you for watching, and hopefully I will see you next time.